Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's SANS webcast, How to Work in Ways That Will Make Your Boss Take Notice. My name is Carol Auth of SANS. Today's featured speaker is Russell Eubanks, SANS Certified Instructor. He will be moderating today's webcast. If during the webcast you have any questions for our presenter, please enter them into the questions window at any time. Please note that this webcast is being recorded, and a copy of the slides and recording of this webcast will be available for viewing later today and can be found on the SANS registration page. And with that, I'd like to hand the webcast over to Russell.
All right. Thank you so much, Carol. Always a pleasure to get to work with you. And thank you, everyone, for joining this afternoon. Really excited around what I get to share with you today in how to work in ways that will make your boss take notice, especially in how we've been working the last few months. I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to engage better and to follow a process that can help us really stand out more, to give more value to them, as well as ultimately to our colleagues and to our respective organizations. So with that, I want to just really start with the real premise of this time we have together. Rather than wait till the end, say, wait, at the end we'll tell you some things, really a focus here. And this statement that shows up on your screen and my screen as well, get wisdom as cheaply as you can, actually came to me long before I knew what a cybersecurity was. Some of the best advice I've ever been given, that idea of how can we learn from others? How can we avoid pain and suffering and scars and regrets by learning from others? And that's a real focus of our time together today, is how can we do that? How can we understand it? And then as you think about that, where are some places where I and you and we can go to find that? Some examples come to mind very, very quickly is looking at different breach reports that come in. Just a couple months ago, the 11th version of the Verizon Data Breach Investigation Report came out, and it told us ways that we can get wisdom without having to have challenges and things that having to go through those same types of problems. Other breach reports, Podimon tells us how much a per record costs when we lose it or we're not the best steward of it. Again, how can that help us? And really looking at that, have this concept of what would it look like if we did that on purpose and by design, with a enormous hat tip to the U.S. Army, who really helped me understand, reading about and understanding their concept of an after-action review. When a mission is over, their practice to look at and do a retrospective review and understand what went well and what didn't go well can help all of us by learning about that practice and applying that practice to help us, say, at the end of every quarter. So just last weekend, over the weekend, I did a quarterly retrospective review, or quarterly lessons learned, to look at how I'm spending my time, the areas that I'm focused on, places I can improve upon, and doing that by design. And actually, you could even do that at the end of every week before you shut down your system. You could look back over your calendar, look at your meetings, look at the notes, wherever you keep your notes at, and just have that intentional check-in with yourself to say, what would it look like if I were to focus on making next week be the best week, or next quarter being the next quarter, and doing that by design from different informative references, your calendars, and ways that we can, again, get wisdom as cheaply as you can. One of the things that I love to focus on in those reviews in particular is looking at the KISS method. Not that KISS method, the method that helps us look at ways of things that we want to keep, or things that we want to improve, or things that we should start or stop. Using that to help inform what are the things and decisions I can make to make next week be the very best week, or next quarter be the best quarter. Again, that KISS method, keep, improve, start, stop. Asking yourselves that question over and over will help you do and put into practice intentional process improvement, again, by design. I'm certain that that can help you a whole lot, and really didn't want to wait till the end to tell you that, and really share and encourage you to maybe start doing that this week. So what are we going to cover? Again, some areas, different categories that I came up with, and I thought, what are some ways of working, or maybe ways of working even better that can be improved, ways that you can start to become much more productive in your respective workday, and in particular ways to stand out in ways that your boss, your leader, your colleagues can notice and take notice of. And then practical ways that you can help build and sustain that momentum going forward. Strategies, techniques that you could put in place to make sure that this is not just a once and done, but a part of the practice of you being the very best version of yourself that you could be. And then finally, one thing of a way to be the fine new guy or fine new gal for as long as possible, some ways and approaches that you might be able to achieve that. And so what are these 5 categories? Well, I'm glad you asked. Here's what those are. Focusing and to serve as our outline for this next hour is looking at our learning, our growth, our time, our meetings, and then as well as what are we doing when we're not working. Areas that I want to focus on to help make sure that you can be the most productive as possible. And a lot of these will be things where I've had to learn the hard way. And my hope for you is that you can get this, what I hope is found as wisdom, as cheaply as what you can for yourself. And so with that, let's look at the first topic of your learning. What are the things that you're learning? What are the things that you're focused on? So 3 years ago, I really got into goal setting and this idea of how can I become the best version of me that I can and do that on purpose and do that by design. And one of my goals were, and don't laugh at me, one of the goals I had was to read 12 books over a year, several years ago. That was my goal. And you say, well, why'd you have that goal? I said, that's not a big deal. Why would you do that? Well, it's because the years before I had read exactly 0. And I thought to myself, well, if you subscribe to the thought process that leaders are readers, I had some work to do, and I wanted to hold myself accountable to do that. And that was a reference that I did and practice I put into place that really exceeded my expectations. Different business books, different leadership books, different security books. Right now, it's the case that I've got so many. I'm looking at my bookshelf right now. So many books I want to read and so many things I want to learn by design. But again, 4 years ago, that was not the case at all. Whereas now, learning, growing, becoming, using those resources as a way to speak into me and help me be the very best version of myself, to work with the customers, clients that I get to work with today to help me show up in a way that can be helpful to them. Why do I do that? Well, looking at that as a way to help shape vocabulary, learning things, and being able to reference the things that I'm speaking about, the things that I'm learning. Of course, with attribution there to say, hey, I read this book and in that book it said something, that's a great way to give back, as well as to, again, have a practical way for you to learn and grow and help make sure that you're becoming the very best version of yourself as well. So much has been said with respect to how that can be a practice that if you install it, a habit if you install it, would be very helpful. One of the examples you can actually say is, looking at one of my favorite authors, John Maxwell. He said he's got this book, it says, good leaders ask great questions, and again, attribution to that. But what I found both in reading a book of that name is that as you start to develop those habits and start to ask better questions, we get better responses and better insight to help us be the very best version of ourselves. Again, I have proven that to be true, and I hope for you, if that's not a habit that you have in place, that's one that you can maybe write down or one that you can challenge yourself to aspire to achieve. Some other ways. What would it look like to be a volunteer, to say, hey, boss, I want to grow, I want to learn, I want to contribute, I want to add value to you, to our organization, to our team, whatever it might be. What are some places where you could do that, where you could say, hey, I've got some time, or maybe I'll make some time, or maybe some of these practices of stopping things and keeping things or improving things that I mentioned earlier might help you create some margin to where you could start to learn some things, maybe doing job shadowing, job sharing practices, watching someone do the things that they do to better understand their functions, whether in your security team or maybe in a business area that depends on the function of your security team in order to achieve. Might be some ways that you could do just that. The great thing about that is you can start to help have some of your questions answered. Why is it that I can't get along with the finance team? Why is it that they always say no when I turn in my expense reports back 3 months ago when we got to do a lot of that? Helping us to understand their perspective, their paradigm can be very helpful. Another benefit would be that we'll have the opportunity to learn and share that learning with our colleagues. Hey, I figured out, I unlocked, I understood now what's in place as a result of some time spent learning the perspective, learning the paradigm of others. So question for you, where can you do some of that this week, this month? What if you spent some time asking those questions and some time investigating what would it look like to become more active, more visible, to help both yourself as those that you're privileged to work with? And when you do that, you'll be known as someone who gets to get some stuff done. Having that reputation, being known or renowned as a student of productivity, someone who can be faced with a problem and a challenge and overcome it. On the other side of that problem, that challenge and issues that you're facing, have that reputation of someone who can just make things happen, especially now. Asking questions like, simple questions like, how can I help? What can I do? How can I contribute? Might be ways where you can start to develop that reputation for yourself. How can I help? What can I do? How can I be someone who goes in and gets some stuff done? Next topic is looking at your growth. What would it look like to start to set some goals and objectives and some stretch goals for yourself to let you become the very best version of yourself? A great quote I heard from one of my favorite authors, Michael Hyatt, about goals says this: a goal is not about what you accomplish. Instead, it's about who you become. What would it look like to, on purpose, become the very best version of yourself so that you can have more contributions, become renowned for being someone who gets things done and can do that in a way that would be helpful and seem valuable to your colleagues, to your organization? The truth is, whether you're in a leadership position or not, the leader you were or the employee you were last year is not what your company needs right now, especially right now in this moment. Through the challenges and things that we're all going through, and we're all going through this together, what are the things that we can do to become on purpose the very best version of ourselves? How do we solve for that now? What changes do we need to make? As I looked at my goals that I set up at the beginning of the year, and I did an evaluation of them at the end of last weekend, I thought, man, I had so many things that I wanted to do, but they were dependent on not having the pandemic that's hit all of us. And so changing some of those, modifying those, updating those so that for the rest of the year, for the next quarter in particular, I can focus on being the best version of myself. So my question for you as I look at this trees that have certainly been growing for some time is, what would you say is on your growth plan? How will you achieve that? What things do you need to learn or experience, or problems that you need to solve or are being challenged to solve that you can solve to become the very best version of yourself? I totally recognize that it's easy for me to ask these questions, but hopefully as we're working through this, you can start to have ideas or think about ways to do that in your life. So one way is looking at all the SANS webcasts. So I didn't know this until last night, but there's actually 4 SANS webcasts going on right now. So I have no idea all the things that we can learn, but here's a screenshot of, as of last night, some of the things that you can go back, recordings that have happened. We can go back and look at these. And so numerous, especially of late, opportunities for us to learn something or to be exposed to something and help get some an hour worth of free training never hurt anyone. And highly encourage you to, if you're not familiar with the archive, to be able to look at and find some topics, find a person, find a speaker, and start to invest, maybe schedule some appointments with yourself to learn occasionally some items that come through this, and many different places where we can learn and become better as a result. And of course, the price is right as well. A particular place here, so my boss at SANS, Frank Kim, and the curriculum lead for the leadership classes and management classes, actually came up with this idea of highlighting some material that actually comes from SANS Management 514 around strategic planning. And this idea of, can the security leader, can all of us as security leaders help learn from business case studies? A lot of examples in the class speak to case studies from Harvard and other prestigious universities to put us in a particular situation or scenario and help us as leaders, help us as security professionals better understand how we would deal with those diverse activities and diverse audiences that we would be able to need to communicate to. Taking that message and making sure that that message is appropriate for the given audience, like what it shows here in this cyber leadership slide. This is a slide straight out of the Class Management 514 that focuses on, based on the audience, what's the information, what's the level of detail that they would need to be expected to understand, communicate, and engage with our particular message. So my question for you is, even using this as a guide, what are you doing to tailor your message of cybersecurity to different stakeholders that you're privileged to work with or work for or to help support? How are you taking the things that you know in your mind, the things that you've learned and studied and maybe even got a certification for, understanding and mastering that concept? But based on who you're communicating to, are you changing, are you tailoring that message in a way that would be helpful for them? I sure hope so. So what are some other places you can learn? So recently, a friend of mine said, hey, Russell, you should really go check out this resource here, Coursera. And in fact, I did. The great thing is some of the classes, many of the classes are free of charge. So think of a college class you take online, kind of the concept that's there. And a class I'm enrolled in now, I'm personally enrolled in a class called The Science of Well-Being. And it's interesting for a technical security person like myself to go into a class that has nothing to do with technology. But all of a sudden it helps me look for ways to be more engaged, more involved, more connected to friends, family, loved ones, colleagues as well as a result of that. Highly recommend that as a way to learn more and expose myself, especially for cyber topics that they have in there. There's some cyber classes. I know some folks have taken classes on understanding cryptography better. I know that's one of the offerings, one of the courses that they have, and that's fantastic. But whatever your role, there can be and should be some things that we're trying to learn and learn better. So my question for you, seeing the pattern here, question for you to challenge you, to help you be the very best version of yourself. Question here, what non-cyber things are you working on right now? What non-cyber things are you trying to learn? What are some places outside of our profession, outside of our craft, that when you learn and improve, if not master them, can make you be and help you strive towards being the very best version of you? Next, looking at our time. Because our time is limited, we must limit how we spend our time. What would it look like to, by design, better plan your days, your weeks, your month, and ultimately your year? A habit that I've gotten into is the first thing I do of the day, especially during weekdays, is to look at my calendar, look at the things obligations that I have, the places I'm supposed to be, or at least supposed to be, And how do I make sure that I'm prepared and ready for them? And by design, start to plan my days before the day begins. Maybe think of being proactive in scheduling yourself to make sure that you're working on things that are the most important. What would it look like to take whatever your priorities are, learning, growth, your time management, to help make sure that you did that and did that on purpose and by design and intentionally? What would it look like to do calendar blocking for your priorities? Hey, I'm busy at 10 o'clock today because today I'm taking that class. Or today I'm going to listen to an archive of a SANS webcast because that's important and something that I need to do to make me the best version of myself. I need to find some time to make sure that I'm worked on and understand or prepare for a conversation or a meeting that we might have, and doing calendar blocking in place. What I've seen is that if you, especially in a corporate environment, your calendar's available to everyone. If you don't mark off time for yourself, others, what will they do? You know exactly what they'll do. They'll schedule over that time, and that time will be gone, and you can't use it for that. And then when the day's over, it's like, you've got regrets, and you wished you'd have blocked it off, and you wished you'd have said, I'm not available at 10 o'clock today. Instead, is there another time where we could meet? I have an appointment. There's something I must do at that time. Another thing that I found is that there's certain times of the day where I'm more productive than others. What that means is, for me, first thing of the morning, I'm the most productive. I get up, nothing on my mind. I work on particular projects, maybe writing or studying or researching or preparing. And I do that first thing of the day because I found that that's the time I'm the most productive. So I schedule that time. And because I know in the afternoon and towards the evening, my mind is kind of mush and it's not worth a whole lot, I try to not do things that are very important at that time of the day. Now that's my bias and that's my bent. That doesn't mean it has to be yours. It doesn't mean that you have to get up early and work on important things first and then prioritize other actions for later. But what's that rhythm for you? What's that time for you where you're the most productive? And what would it look like if you guarded and you defended that so that you could have the most productivity as possible? That's what I want for you. And that's what I've learned in myself, is that the mornings are my time. And I want for you to find that special time for you as well, so that you can be most productive and you can get as much things done as what is possible. Another thing I found effective is to have a robust not to-do list. What are all the things that I could do, but if I did them or I tried to do them, they would be in the way of me achieving my most important goals? How do I understand that I can't spend my time everywhere, but there are some areas where I can focus my time on and spend my time in such a way to be very productive? What is that for you? What are those things that you're the best at? And how do you tailor your schedule, tailor your time around doing just that on purpose and by design? Do you need some dwell time? What I found, whenever there's a big decision I need to make, I find that I need a little bit of dwell time, a little time to think about it, to process it, to do the pros and do the cons, maybe a little miniature risk assessment, to put it in cybersecurity terms. What if you had time like that in place to say, you know what, because it's a major decision, I'm going to sleep on it. Or because it's an important project, let me think about it and find a special way that I can bring a contribution to the benefit of our team, to the benefit of our organization. And I'll get back with you tomorrow. And I'll let you know tomorrow. How much does that cost? My wife used to be a critical care nurse, very intense situations, very much life or death. She said that even when doing that role, she would always have the mantra of, even in that high stress, high stakes environment, she would always say, you always have time to just take a minute, to assess, to see what's going on, to pause and make the very best decision, not the one that just comes to you right away. What would that look like for you? And so my question for you is this: how are you spending your time? Are you focused on the things that matter the most? Are you just keeping busy and just doing everyone else's priorities by going to their meetings and doing what they need? How can you find some time to make you the very best version of you? One way that I've found here, and the complete credit here to Michael Hyatt and his book, Free to Focus, give this idea of, as I start to evaluate different things that I could do, what filter, what construct, what mechanism like this might be able to be used to say, how do I make sure I'm working on the thing that matters the most to me? With some examples you can see here, different zones here. So some say there's not much management work without a 4-quadrant grid, and here's exactly what that is, and kind of inverted a little bit to show this desire zone. So what's that? An area where you're passionate about and you're proficient about. Maybe you really like cybersecurity, and from a proficiency, you get paid to do that. It might be areas in your desire zone, where maybe at the very bottom, the drudgery zone. Is interesting to look at that, of places where you're not very good at it and you don't love it at all. What I found is taking a construct like this, in different ways as you can look at it, but to do an assessment of how much time are you spending in each of those zones or those areas or quadrants that you might have, and do a snapshot to say, here's where I'm at today. Maybe I'm not spending any time in areas where I'm passionate and proficient about. But what decisions, what questions can I ask myself? What decisions can I make that help me strive towards spending more time there by focusing on areas that I love to do and I'm compensated for, to use that as a way to say, how do I make sure I can start saying no to some things? Turns out no is a complete sentence. Some of us, my hands extended at me, have a hard time with saying that and saying, I can't do that, and I shouldn't do that because of the opportunity cost involved with doing that particular task. So find a way to look at and spend your time and do an assessment like this, maybe on a quarterly basis. And over time, that incremental gain that you have might allow you to spend more time in the areas that you love the most. So a question: what would it look like for you to focus on things that only you can do? That's what I want for you. That's what I long for you to have, is that capability and that insight into being able to do just that. So, next topic, your meetings. Now, it used to be cute to who goes to too many meetings, and we all go to too many meetings. What are some things that we can do to get as much value out of them, and maybe even get out of going to them? And that's the next area I want to talk about. Turns out there's some settings in Outlook. Have you ever wondered why it is that meetings always last for an hour or 2 hours or 3 hours or 4 hours, how long that is? Have you ever thought, is an hour needed? Or are we meeting for an hour because that's the default setting that Microsoft gives us to have meetings in? What would it look like to just trim some time off of that? What would it look like to shave off 5 minutes for a half an hour meeting, or 10 minutes off an hour meeting, to bring in some constraints of time that might cause you to get to the point and get to the topic much quicker, and therefore get some extra time savings for you at the end as a result? What might that look like? What would it look like, in addition to having less time to meet, what would it look like if you had requirements such as to have an agenda? What would it look like if you, and if you need air cover from your boss, if your boss said, hey, if there's no agenda, how do I know if I'm supposed to be there? How do I know if I'm really needed? I'm going to need an agenda, or I don't think I'm going to be able to meet. I'm not sure what you need from me. I'm not sure what value I can provide. To give you insight and the capability to say, that's what it is, and you're right, that's something that only I can do, therefore I will come to your meeting. What about the attendees? Especially meetings that have been around for a while, kind of get long in the tooth. A lot of people want to go, a lot of people do go, and you think about that, It's kind of expensive. From a stewardship perspective, how expensive are the meetings that you're calling and you're going to? And how do you know that you're getting that much value out of the meetings? If you got 10 people, they make $100 an hour, all of a sudden we can do math and say, wow, did we get that much value out of that meeting? If not, what questions? How can you get uninvited, or maybe have that whole thing canceled by asking really good questions? Standing out is not very difficult if there's certain things that you would be willing to do. Things like, what if you got there a little bit early? Make sure you were there on time. And if you're the leader of the meeting, you should certainly be there early to have an agenda, to follow the flow, to make sure everything's going well and as expected. What would it look like to come prepared to those meetings? Oh, now Russell, now you're meddling a little bit here. I go to the meetings, and after a while I'll figure it out, and then what would it look like if expectations were given to read the materials or come prepared in some way to that conversation? I think the best alternative I've seen to that is to actually spend time in the meeting, maybe the first 10 minutes. Okay, for the first 10 minutes of the meeting, everyone go read that information, and based on your reading of that, then we'll ask questions, we'll have conversations, and have the balance of our time in that meeting. I think it's an effective approach. It seems kind of awkward, but I've seen that work to make sure that everyone's on the same page, literally, metaphorically, and can make a contribution on the particular topic. A hack that I like to do is, what if you gave yourself the goal in every meeting that you go to come up with a good question? Maybe you write it down, maybe you rehearse it, maybe you prepare it, but in some way to show, yes, I need to be here, I'm supposed to be here, there's a contribution that I can make to the greater good to help us understand and contribute in some way. What are some practices that could be done? That's what I want for you. You can't get rid of all your meetings. I can't get rid of all my meetings, although I do have a whole lot less than I've ever had before in my life right now. But what can you do to get the most out of them? And how can you ask better questions of, do we need it? What value does it bring? And how do we make sure from a stewardship perspective, we're using our time as best as possible? And so my question for you is, how are your meetings going? I heard some of you over the magic of the internet, you were sighing, you didn't love it. I think that practices like this can help reduce Zoom or Skype or WebEx or Teams, whatever technology you're using, reduce the fatigue of showing up in that way to make sure that you're a great steward of your and your organization's time. Whew, we know who this is here. Look at it, our boss. He or she is upset. He's wondering about what are we doing. In particular, what about meetings with your boss, with your leader, the person in charge of you, your supervisor, your manager, your director, whatever the title might be? What would it look like if you decided to proactively prepare a meeting agenda with your boss and put things in order of importance? What if, just like an executive summary and report, what if the executives never read anything besides executive summary? What if in your agenda for your meetings with your boss, starting right away, had an agenda, and the most important thing you needed their help, their insight, their direction on was the first thing on that list? And then what if the second most important thing that you needed their help, their guidance, their direction for was the second thing that was listed there, all the way down the list? And you're not going to like this. What if you sent this agenda to your boss days in advance so they could know what you're going to talk about, know the concerns, be prepared with being able to help you understand any challenges that you might be facing in your respective job duties? What would that look like to do that? What would it look like if you had a conversation like this? Hey, boss, hey, leader, hey, person in charge of me, what's the things that are most important to you? What are your goals? What did your boss assign you to do that you're working on, and you're not quite sure how you're going to deliver on, and you're kind of stressing, and you're going to bed at night, you kind of worry about those things. What are those things? And how can I help you with that? Where's this opportunity to volunteer to help your leader, your boss, meet their goals? Opportunity for you to help them, stand out to them, at least be aware and recognize exercising. I've heard from several folks recently that they get up early now and they go out and exercise, and then they come to their Zoom calls and they go into their workspace and do their work. That's awesome. Maybe it's at the end of the day. Find something to do that makes you better at the things that we're privileged and we get to do, and find what that is. The great thing is, if you try something and you hate it, you get to ditch it. And you have the knowledge of, well, I know running is not my thing. Maybe something else is. What can that be, and how can that help you, again, be the very best version of yourself as possible? Do what's best for you. So I've talked about, I almost said we talked about, but I've been the talker. I've talked about for the last 40 minutes different categories and areas where you can consider showing up in ways that makes your boss notice and help you be the very best version of yourself. But what it's going to take is some action. You're gonna have to do something or a series of something. Then you're going to start it, and you might get frustrated. You may not love it. You may have to switch and do something else, and all that is just fine. What are some ways that you can start and create and sustain that momentum? How can you make that a part of your normal weekly activities to do some of these things? I love calendar reminders. If you could see my personal calendar, there's tons of things that I have set to remind me to do certain things. Check the oil, check the air filters, call 3 friends in a month and have a virtual lunch set up with them. Whatever those might be, as triggers to help me remember to the things that are important and how I can make sure that I sustain it. Whatever those are. What would it look like if you did that? What would it look like if you just stayed curious and very interested? What don't I know, and how could I solve for that? What did I always wish I understood better? And what's a way that I can spend time right now, or time this afternoon, or time this evening when your spouse or your kids go to bed, that you can focus on learning a little bit more about that? How can you remain curious, start to understand, and then start to celebrate this gift of always being able to learn? So many places to learn things that make us better people. How can we do that in a way that can help us and do that on purpose? How can we sustain that momentum? A couple of ways that I found is to celebrate those wins. When you start, some people say, 20 to 90 days to install a new habit. When you achieve that, do something nice for yourself. Celebrate that in some way. Tell your spouse, tell your significant others, tell them, hey, I went out every day for the most of the last 90 days, and I went for a walk, or I went for a run, or I attended a SANS webcast. I did something to make me a better version of myself. And they'll give you a pat on the back. They'll say, good job. And you can use that as momentum to drive and strive for even greater things. But start small, build momentum, and over time, it's going to get bigger and bigger. And your list of things that you want to learn and the list of things that you want to learn about are going to grow and grow and grow. And it'll be such that you'll have way more opportunity to do just that. It'll be more difficult to pick what to focus on versus all the things that you could focus on. I really believe, and I've seen in my experience, that creating, building, and sustaining that momentum has been very, very key for success. Tips like time blocking. I'm sorry I can't meet at 1 o'clock today. I'm attending a webcast of how to make my boss happier with the things I'm doing. I can meet with you tomorrow at 1 o'clock. Guarding that time where you can learn and develop and grow into the very best version of yourself. Hey, you know what? We need to meet, but I think we're going to meet at, we're going to shave off some time from that meeting. Maybe we start a little bit late, maybe we end a little bit early, and we'll give some time back versus use the default amount of time that our calendar tools have for scheduling meetings that we have. After action reviews or opportunities to have lessons learned to say, how can we make the next time literally be our best time? Whether it's next week, whether it's next month, whether it's next quarter, whether it's next year. How can we build in times to look back, reflect, evaluate, and say, what things do I need to keep? What things do I need to improve? What things do I need to stop? And what things do I need to start in my journey of becoming the very best version of myself? One way to do that is to just declare that you're going to be the fine new guy or the fine new gal for as long as possible. Just declare it. Just own it. Just say, you know what, I'm going to be that. I recognize that I'm new to the company. I've not been here. I don't know how all these things work. I'm the new person. Here's a question from a I don't know what you know perspective. Here's some questions that I can ask. When can you do this? Well, when you go to a new job, maybe when you get a new role, go to a new department, have a new expectation. What about when you just have a new attitude? I can be a student, even if the student has worked at the place that you've worked for over 25 years. Just in that new attitude, that new mindset of what can I learn? Can I ask better questions? What are some of those questions? I'm so glad you asked. A question like this, a question where you can ask out of sincerity, say, hey, help me understand why it's that way. Help me understand why we need to keep logs for 4 years. I don't know, my experience has not been that, but what do I need to know? What can you teach me? What can you show me so that I can understand why that's in place, whatever that thing is? Another good question. Hey, what's the goal? What are we trying to achieve? And even more importantly than that, how will we know when we reach that goal? How can we know that we've done that good thing? We've achieved the intended results. We've celebrated appropriately and probably got to move on to the next thing that's the most important to us and our respective organization. How can we be and have that mindset? What can we learn? How can we grow? And how can we share that with our colleagues? How can we make sure that they see and we model this behavior and they see the change in us, and they notice and recognize that? And then for us, what are some ways that we can get wisdom as cheaply as we can? No need to wait. We can start that now. No, we can start that and create that momentum now to create a culture of continuous improvement that maybe starts inside of us. And maybe we think about before we go to sleep tonight, and maybe we wake up early tomorrow morning and we say, what would it look like if as a practice we learned in ways that didn't hurt us as much? We developed relationships, got involved in information sharing through an information sharing analysis center, maybe in the industry that you're in, maybe through a colleague or a long lost friend or former coworker, ways to learn from each other in ways where we don't have to repeat the same mistakes over and over again. It's going to make your boss happy. It's going to make you happy. And it's going to allow you to look for some ways in which you can apply this practical advice and be more productive, show up in ways that your boss will notice, build and sustain the momentum, and be the fine new person in your organization for as long as possible. So what are some of these things? Again, the goal that we have, get wisdom as cheaply as you can. How can you learn the easy way, become more self-aware, and start to ask critical questions along your respective journey? So thanks for spending the last 48 minutes. I see we've got a few questions in here, so I'm going to go and look through those now. So thanks for sending those questions in. Let's see. What is your recommendation if your manager doesn't trust you and see you to deserve your managerial position, or see you're too young, or say that you're too young to? So what if your manager doesn't trust you and says you're too young to deserve that manager position? Age different issue there. Well, I love clarity. Sometimes, having been a boss many years, recognize that there's some good days and some bad days. So try to find ways to talk about that topic on a good day. One trick that I've seen is to, if your boss has an executive admin, ask them questions like, hey, how are they doing? Is today a good day or is today a bad day? And you can use that as a guide and just put it on the agenda, let them know in advance, hey, I want to understand that better. My goal is to become a people leader, and I want to get your advice. I want to learn lessons from you and then prove to you that I could be trusted with that. Let's have a conversation. So teeing it up, then having that bold conversation, and then doing an evaluation afterwards, that lessons learned or that after action review that I talked about a couple times in our time together today. Evaluate those conversations. Is there a possibility that your boss has some feedback for you, some things that you can do to improve, maybe things that you'll put on your individual development plan? Might be some ideas. Evaluate that for a couple of times, and then if you get to the place where it's just not going to happen, maybe it's a time to have a different type of a conversation. I want to be a leader. I want to be a manager. I don't think I can have that here. And just being more frank, more direct, more bold in conversations can help with that, I believe. So thanks for that question. Next question. So do you have a corporate and/or accountability buddy? Yes, I have friends both in industry and out that I hold myself accountable to, both for goals and the roles that I play, husband, father, leader, business owner, instructor, and those things that I do. I want to, a small number of people, share those goals, share those things that I'm working on, and help hold myself accountable, and in many cases have that relationship in both directions. But having someone that I can work with and they can hold me accountable is fantastic. So you saw a calendar thing as well. And you saw someone's calendar reminder during a Zoom meeting. It had been deferred for 99 days. I have not seen that. That's a Zoom option. I have not. I really enjoyed the virtual backgrounds more than being able to find that setting, deferring a calendar reminder for 99 days. Wow, I'll have to check into that one. That's one way of stalling and putting things out. Next question, Roger. So tried many of your suggestions. Excessive meetings have me losing momentum. Passion for the job is fading away. How can I turn this around? Yeah, it's a tough one, especially now where we've all been working for, what, 3 straight months. It feels like every day is, some people say, Groundhog Day. I really encourage you to take a look at the things that you're doing. Ask questions like, why, the why behind the what. The reason I'm getting up early in the morning is. The reason I'm having calendar blocking is. The reason these meetings are happening are, and start to question those in respectful ways. Hey, do I have to go? Is there a contribution that I can make to this meeting? Or is there opportunity to not go to that meeting? I promise to look at the meeting minutes, and if there's anything I need to do or become aware of, I will hold myself accountable to the whole team and do the things necessary there. Might be a strategy to help towards that, freeing up some time. I found great success in finding the things that only I can do, and the things if I don't do, they won't get done, and scheduling time on my calendar to help and do those particular items. So hopefully that can be helpful. Next question. Yeah, being a remote worker now, I think we all are remote. Many of us are remote workers now. What's been in the job 1 year as a security analyst? How do I maintain open communication to get feedback on how I'm doing? For me, it goes back to a great book I read a couple years ago from John Maxwell, Good Leaders Ask Great Questions. What's a better way to ask questions of your leader, of your boss? How am I doing? What am I working on? Here's my goals. Here's my progress. What do you see in me that I can do better? What would it look like actually if you did that at every one of your meetings with your boss, or maybe every other meeting you have with your boss? Hey, we've got some extra time. I want to ask, what would you want me to stop or start or keep doing or improve doing? That KISS method I mentioned before, giving time for that, to ask for feedback. I want to be the very best security analyst that you've ever seen. What are some things that I'm not seeing that bother you or annoy you or cause you stress? Might be some better questions to ask to create space for that continued conversation. What's your recommendation on when a boss does not make a priority on scheduled meetings? Well, on one hand, I might say that's awesome. If the meeting is with me, wow, I think I'd be bummed out with that. So I guess it depends on context, but if it's one with me, I would probably worry about that a great deal, because for me, importance to get feedback, asking good questions, making sure I'm working on the things that are most important to them. Recommendations when they don't make a priority. Being direct. Hey, boss, I really enjoy my 1-hour meeting I get with you every month. It's so important for my growth, my development. As you know, one of my goals is to, whatever it is, what can I do to get some more time and focus from you? Are there any barriers are in place? Is there anything I can do to help free up your calendar so that those meetings? So I think conversations like that would be critical. So next one, how can I prove to be, so no matter how many times I requested a specific opportunity, I was not given that. How can I prove to be worthy of an opportunity? Boy, that's a tough one. That's a deep one as well. Wow, so many questions here. So in this one, I think proving yourself to be a value added to the project, to the team, to the initiative, and then maybe sending a note occasionally, maybe once a month, once a quarter, to your leader or the leader of projects that you want to be a part of, and talk about specific things that you've achieved and how if you had more opportunity, more involvement, more leadership roles, you could make a positive improvement on that particular initiative. Would be my recommendation. Wow, I did not see so many questions come through, so I hope I can get through them all. Next one, so for a boss that thinks you should go out after your schedule to demonstrate you're productive, what could you do? So work for a boss that thinks you should go out of your schedule to demonstrate you're productive. Oh, so maybe your boss wants you, if your normal working hours are 40 hours a week, they want you to work 50 or 60, or want you to work the weekend. Boy, that's tough, especially right now. I would say do an assessment of, like a tool with the Freedom Compass that I showed earlier, of how you're spending the time that you have in place, and consider communicating that with your boss. Hey, boss, I've got this and I've got that. These are the things that I'm focused on. These are my priorities. Here's my things that I'm not going to do. So here's that opportunity cost. I think that communicating about that should have a better conversation of what are the things to have that elusive work-life balance, as well as allow you to pursue your most important goals as well. Next question. So how to use these 5 ways to motivate remote desktop support staff, especially since the one-on-one connections are not always there anymore. One of the things that I saw with that one and came to my mind as I was reading your question is, what would it look like if you spent some time either before the day or after the day or even during the day, instead of just working on particular tasks and initiatives, spending time doing what I've heard called as a check-in round. Hey, I know we've got an hour for this meeting, but how are you doing? Maybe someone let it slip that they had a family member who was not doing well or sick, or some issues that they're facing, and just especially in a small, if there's a small number of folks on that call, or maybe individual calls, asking and having some time for personal connection and just checking on each other and showing the more human side, especially if you're in a position of leadership, modeling that and making it okay to work that way, to me, especially right now, cannot be overstated. A couple more questions. There's a question. That was not a question. All right, well, I think I've gotten through all the questions, and it looks like it's 1:57. So here's my contact information. I would be happy to entertain any questions that you have. There's my email address, my company, Security Ever After, and also privileged to work with dear friends of mine at Enclave Security as well. Anything I can do to be helpful, please do not hesitate to reach out. It's been my pleasure to spend an hour with you. Thanks for hanging out with me. There's so many of you still here on the call. If there's ever anything that I can do, let me know. Otherwise, continue to strive for being the very best version of you that you can be. That's my hope for you. And with that, Carol, back to you.
All right. Thank you so much, Russell, for your great presentation, which helps bring this content to the SANS community. To our audience, we greatly appreciate you listening in. For a schedule of all upcoming and archived SANS webcasts, including this one, please visit sans.org/webcast. Until next time, take care, and we hope to have you back again for the next SANS webcast.